Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I see people I know in the room, which is encouraging. Let me talk a little bit about how I ended up here, because it certainly wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't one of those kids who sat in front of the mirror and dreamed about being a senator one day. I wanted to be the Green Lantern or a drum machine. I didn't want to be a politician. In fact, I grew up in a family that was very active in politics, but hated all politicians. But it makes sense that I'm here in a way. My mother is in education. She's an educator and an education advocate. When she was young, she's from the Bay Area. She worked at a school called University Without Walls. It was in Oakland. It was essentially a true community college, a college that was open to everyone in the community, regardless of their walk of life, their financial situation, or whatever hardship they had. My father in South Texas was a farm worker who had then transitioned to being an advocate and an activist for farm workers, and was trying to deal with not just the conditions in the fields, but also in other issues like medical care, education, and so forth. And somehow his cadre of people learned about University Without Walls in the Bay Area and invited representatives from University Without Walls to visit South Texas, McAllen in particular, to learn about how it works. And then, they met. Here I am. But I think that caring about people, especially vulnerable people, or the most vulnerable among us, is sort of in my DNA. And since that time, I've charted a path for myself where I wanted very much to find vulnerable people and help them. I got my MSW, and then after that I got a law degree, became a civil rights attorney where I represented farm workers, poor school children's, poor school districts, undocumented immigrants who were the victims of vigilante ranchers and so forth. And then, so a weird series of events, I ended up here, elected 2.5 years ago. What I've learned though, and maybe this is a little bit of cynicism now that I've been in politics for not quite 3 years, is that I measure compassion in 2 ways. In one way, compassion is a very affirmative, overt gesture to care for someone who is in dire need of that care. That but for your effort, they are left unprotected. And they need your help and protection so that not that their quality of life is any better than anyone else's, but so their quality of life is on par with those who don't have to worry about it at all. It's almost like you're trying to get people to a state where they're not completely conscious of whatever it is in their life is causing them to be in either a subservient or a vulnerable position. That's sort of the traditional model. The other model is that anything that you do that's not in your own self-interest solely is compassion. I've learned, especially over the past 2 years, that any gesture of goodwill, any willingness to help, any effort that can be made on behalf of another person where you don't stand to immediately benefit, maybe but for a good feeling in your soul, is a compassionate gesture that has a tremendous amount of value that we may not value enough. And I guess in my mind I'm thinking about my council colleagues, many of whom are not seen as, let's say, civil rights or protectors of the vulnerable folks in the city, but at the same time, when you listen to them, and then you listen to other folks, somebody wants to approve a park in a poor side of town because they believe that those folks have a right to good quality of life and green space like everyone else does. Another person doesn't want to raise your SAWS and CPS rates because they believe that there are folks who live in a city who can't afford to keep up with the growing rates. There might be someone else who believes that by protecting the aquifer or focusing on development over the recharge zone, that's an investment in our children so that we have water that we can use and have it be a thriving city in the decades to come. Granted, the last 3 examples are not sexy examples in the way that we measure the way we help people, but I've come from a model where I was very much bully pulpit, litigation, fist in the air, civil rights, right? That model, and I've come to appreciate these small gestures just as much. And so, you know, I'm at that interesting crossroads where I have to decide what it is I want to do, how I want to spend my time, spend my life, given the very unique opportunity that I have right now, representing the area of town that I grew up in. What's the best use of my time? What's the best use of the authority that I have now, the power that I have now? Don't repeat that or tweet that, but you know, I am learning every day that there is a certain amount of authority that I have and can use to affect good or maybe more be self-serving. I mean, the opportunities are certainly there. But in looking at that measure, I will make the case that San Antonio is an amazingly compassionate city. Whether we label ourselves that officially through resolution or not is one thing, but are we a compassionate city? Absolutely. We're the 7th largest city in the country. And in this city, if you have to pull over because you've got a blown tire or your car breaks down, I would argue that within at least 30 minutes, a stranger will stop to ask you if you need help. That's not common in cities our size. We probably have an overabundance of nonprofits in our city. The ecosystem of nonprofits here is probably unhealthy. But nonetheless, they're here because everybody wants to help. Even if you look at the city count, even if you look at the city budget, and I'm not trying to be suit and tie down. I'm sort of giving you this is a new perspective for me. I didn't have this perspective up until not too long ago. If you look at the city budget, the amount of money that we spend on, let's say, delegate agencies that do work that we care about, Each One Teach One, Any Baby Can, United Way, and so forth. For a city our size, we spend a tremendous amount of money on these kinds of organizations. To other cities spend them. The same can be said for our investment in education. The same can be said for our investment in the arts and so forth. I'm not saying that we do enough. I'm not saying be happy, bless you. I'm not saying look at how great we are. I'm just saying that compared to other cities, we'll talk about effort in a minute, but compared to other cities, I think there's a strong case that can be made that we're a compassionate city, that we care very much for one another. Not without our problems, not without a checkered, troubled history that we're trying to correct, not without some of the traditional follies and difficulties that other cities have. But I do believe the one thing that makes our city what it is the character of the people here as a whole. And it's unique to us. As a litigator, I came across a number of lawyers who've been educated and lived on the East Coast, who when they came to San Antonio felt like we were all fake because of how friendly we were. And they kept waiting for that to go away, to dissipate. And it doesn't. We really are this nice for the most part. And I'm proud of that. But let's talk about what that means for us and where we have to go. What that also means is that we can be so nice sometimes. We can be so caring sometimes. Even for folks that we disagree with, we don't want to upset them. We create consequences in our head for actions that we take that almost convince us to not move on something. And that's where we find ourselves in positions like we did 6 or 7 months ago when we all realized that we didn't have a non-discrimination ordinance that included gays and lesbians. I don't think that was by design, but for whatever reason we never got around to it. I'm not quite sure why that was. I have my theories, you do too. But but it had to be done. You know, the way I describe it is, well, first let me go back and talk about that for a quick minute. And I hope I'm not boring you guys. It feels like a coffee talk. You know, I'm not a subject matter expert. I don't care about issues of people because I've learned so much about them and can speak about or to them in a way that makes me hyper-qualified to do it. Right? It's actually very simple. I care about people, I see there's a need, let's address that need, but that doesn't mean that I'm the expert on it. I can't tell you how many times during the NDO conversation I might have used a wrong word or addressed someone the wrong way. And in some ways I think that it diminished, I was diminished in their eyes because they expected me to use all the right words and be up to date on all the phrases and acronyms. I'm not. I just knew that there was something that had to be done that affected people in my life that I cared about, and I know everyone else in the room as well. And so that's really the motivation. I think often in settings like this, and especially in schools of social work, I spend a lot of time, we are so over concerned with the terminology and being thoughtful about the way that we talk about something. We never let ourselves get to the action. Getting on with getting it done. Even if it's messy, just do it. Let's go, right? So with the NEO, it was, look, I can't believe that we don't cover these folks. We absolutely should, for a variety of reasons. Some which are grassroots, like actually protecting people, and others that are top-heavy, like making us competitive for Fortune 500 companies. I guarantee that if that vote had gone a different way, some of our opportunities in terms of competitiveness may not come to our front door the way they might in the future. So we just set out to fix it, right? It wasn't because I'm the expert on the LGBT community. It's not because I have a background in it. I don't, you know. I'm straight. I don't have I have gay relatives, but not in my immediate family. I didn't grow up with a gay best friend. I just know people in my life who are gay and lesbian. And I know people who have people in their lives who are gay and lesbian. And the very basic question was this. Do we believe that it should still be legal to discriminate against someone because of who they are? That's it, right? All that fancy 4 chapters of some book somewhere, not interested in it. That's the basic question. Should that still be legal? The answer has to be no. So then we go about going through the process to change the answer. And that's it. It was the same answer I asked myself when I went after payday lenders. It's the same question that we ask ourselves when we're doing anything. I don't know if it makes us particularly compassionate in a special way compared to anyone else's efforts, just because it's official and it gets a lot of media attention. And, you know, my name came out of, who's the crazy guy on Fox News? He has his own channel now. It's Blaze. What's his name? Glenn Beck. When your name comes out of Glenn Beck's mouth, you really upset a lot of people. But well, I guess what I'm saying is, my point is that that's not the measure, right, of the magnitude of what you're doing. Just because you're getting a lot of attention, just because Glenn Beck knows your name or is using your name, doesn't mean that what you're doing is of more substance, is more important than anything else. It just gets more attention. So I guess I'm making a pitch for the big stuff and the little stuff, right? And that we measure compassion often as the big stuff. And if we're not doing the big stuff, then we're not as compassionate as we could be. Maybe that's true, but if we also focus on the little things, if we focus on the strengths that we have as a city, we might actually feel better about where we're at, and that is motivating to achieve what we may consider the bigger ones. I believe in every endeavor that involves caring for or protecting the most vulnerable among us, we are already halfway there. But we don't give ourselves credit because we've already got a solid foundation in this city. In fact, I would argue that in this city, the question is whether or not we have the public or political will to do anything. It's really, of course we do. It's really, the question is how well we want to do it, right? It's the level of time and investment we're willing to make that is really the measure. And that is leaps and bounds beyond where other cities are. We're in a good spot. You should be very hopeful and encouraged. I'm at a vantage point now where I see the city in a completely different way, and in some ways I can be very disheartened. But in other ways I'm really, really, really encouraged. You guys are certainly part of that. I mean, I probably should put my phone out and take a picture of you and tweet it to all the things that we deem important, we're halfway there. In our individual capacity, we can do a tremendous amount. We have to learn how to value that. In our larger official capacities, we're very, very close. And the question isn't, are you willing to do it? The answer is, I think, already yes, whatever it might be, but it's how well. And that's the final frontier. Does that make sense? You know, it's a bad example, and it's certainly not a pitch, but I'll just to illustrate the point. Our mayor, Guyan, cares very, very much about education. And so if you look at the amount of money he spent on education in his tenure, you can chart it. First, there was an increase in education funding. And then we made some delegate agencies, official agencies of the city. And then he decided to memorialize in a building our best effort to deal with helping folks get to college, that's Catholic college. And then he realized in his mind that he discovered that investing in young students has the biggest payoff. And so then he decided to ask all of you to vote to raise your own taxes to fund pre-K 4SA. I'm not arguing the merit of those programs or whether or not you should agree with it, but my point is the question that he asked himself was not, are we willing to do it, but how well? Like, what's our commitment look like? But the baseline, which is, do we agree with these core principles? Throughout the city, the answer is already yes. And so I guess what I'm saying is that for people like the folks in the room, you should start at where you really are, which is there's a tremendous amount of care and consensus about caring for and protecting vulnerable people, or animals even. The last frontier, I believe, is how well. What's that investment look like? Are we willing to do it grade A or junior varsity? But that's a great problem to have. That's a great place to be. You're not trying to get anyone to write a paragraph. You're just trying to decide on what kind of punctuation mark to use at the end. You know, I'm very encouraged by that. I think you guys should be too. In any case, I'm rambling, so I'm happy to take questions. But the way I would tie that in with public service is that I believe public service fits both models, right? The one that we may value more, which is the big box, heavy swing, aim for the rafters effort, but that it's also comprised of all these little ones which can add up to create a critical mass of relatively good work that slowly move our city and community in the right direction. It's not, look, these kind of movements, this kind of work, that we're not a Kawasaki Ninja on a MotoGP course. It's a decommissioned aircraft carrier being pulled around by tugboats. But that doesn't mean it's not a worthy endeavor, and that those tugboats ultimately, at the end, don't have a tremendous amount of power. And as that aircraft carrier turns and reaches its final destination, it may have taken a very, very long time, but had those tugboats not put in the work, it would have never happened at all. And so I'm saying we should really, really value being a tugboat. All right, here we go. I'm ready.